this is Alma and welcome to my book journey. Today I have a really fun video for you today. I am finally getting around to finish filming my May wrap-up. And I read 9 books this month, and there a lot of different ones in this group. I was had to make my list because, you know, as we get to the end of the month and we think about, okay, what did I read at the beginning of the month? And so I had to write my notes down and figure out, okay, what did I read at the beginning of the month? And what were those books about? But I did read a lot of good ones. But I'm gonna usually what I do before is I like kind of go in order of how I read them. This time I put them in order of, I grouped them in genres because, like I said, it's been a long time since I've read these books and I had to go back and make some notes because it's been a while. So like I said, I read 9 books, and I've got nonfiction, I've got middle grade fantasy, and I've got a couple others that are the end that I guess they have a category, but since they were just 2 that were, I guess one's a mystery and one's a classic. So I guess those are a category, I guess. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first book I have is a nonfiction book, and this one is Under the Banner of Heaven, and this is by John Krakauer. I should have looked up how to pronounce his name. Okay, so this book. I chose this book because I needed for Katie's Paperbacks and Ponytails. Her prompt for May was read a book set in a place where you've lived. And so I chose this book because it's set in the state of Utah, and I have lived in the state of Utah several times. The first time I lived there was when my husband was in the military, and he was stationed at Hill Air Force Base, and that was like in the early 90s or the middle 90s that we lived there. And we lived there for several years, and then we moved away again. And then in 2000, I'm trying to think, 2000, was it 2008 maybe? I should have looked at in the 2000s, early 2000s, we moved back to Utah, and we lived there for several more years. And we moved back to Utah at that time because my husband we were missionaries, Christian missionaries living in Utah at the time. And Utah has a very special place in my heart because when we lived there the first time back in the 90s when my husband was in the military, I was saved in Utah and at the church where we were attending at the time. And so I was saved there and I was baptized there. So it is really the beginnings of my Christian walk in that state, and has special meaning for me. And then also my youngest daughter was born there when we went back the second time. And so anyway, let's get back to the book. So that's why I chose this book, and also because I saw that Cheryl had did a couple videos about the book, and then so I was like, oh, I want to read it so I can watch her videos and see, see what she thinks about it. Okay, I was under the assumption, and I'm really bad because I don't read titles of books. So in this little portion right here talks about a murder that happened in July 24th. A woman and her infant daughter were murdered, and so I thought this was like a true crime book about this murder that happened in Utah, and it's a horrible murder. And so I started reading it, and then it does start with that portion of it, that what happened, but it was like and the whole first part was like, oh, they're telling us what happened, and really quick and fast. And like, what's the rest of the book gonna be about? Well, what the book was really about was about the people that committed this crime. They were involved in a cult that really influenced their thought, the way they thought and how they justified this murder, basically. And what the author did was that he looked at the individuals that did this, what faith they were part of, and why they did it. And these two men were involved in what's known as a fundamentalist group that believed in, what their main focus really was polygamy, and in Utah. And this group is like what they call like something that was like an offshoot of the mainline LDS Church, Latter-day Saints in Utah, Mormons. And so he talked about that in the first part of the book, about these different, there's different sects of different groups that are all apart from each other but have similar beliefs, but the main one is polygamy. And I can tell you, when we moved back to Utah the second time when we were missionaries, well, before we moved back, we were there, and one of the organizers for the churches there, he took us on a little trip, not a trip, but like a tour of the community before we moved out there. And I remember, I can't remember what town we were driving through, but he told us, he goes, as we were driving, I goes, you see those houses over there? And they were huge houses. And he goes, those are the polygamous houses. And we were like, what? And he goes, yeah. He goes, and he told us, even though in the mainline Mormon church, polygamy has been abolished, so to speak, there's still people that practice it, under the radar. And so this book this author went into the history of these groups and how they are deep in polygamy, even after all these years and even to this day. And I really appreciated him going through that. And what I really appreciated was that towards the middle of the book, he goes, all these groups have one thing in common, and that is the person that started the whole thing. And it all goes back to him. And that is the founder of the Mormon Church, which is Joseph Smith. And so he tells his story and his rise to power and in his time period, and bringing up the church and starting the church, and then ultimately he was killed and others took over, and then they moved to Utah. And he really does a good job of looking into the history of the church and the things that happened to them and the things they did to others. And I'm thinking, wow, why did I think it was going to be about just this other murder? But, I don't pay attention, because the title of the book actually is Under the Banner of Heaven, a story of violent faith. And that's what this book was. It was a story of the violent faith that these people grew up in. And there was a talk in this book about, of course, polygamy and the evils of that, and they justified it because polygamy was in the Bible. Yet in my own reading of the Bible and learning of the Bible, there was never anything positive about polygamy in the Bible. There was always, every time polygamy happened in the Bible, something negative always happened. And polygamy was never a command of God. It was something that men chose to do on their own. And God, allowed it to happen. And there was always consequences for polygamy in the Bible. So it was never looked upon as something that God wanted, that God approved of or chose for his people. And Joseph Smith, when he started his church, he believed the opposite of that. He did believe that God commanded it, and that's what God wanted. And so this book is it's pretty fascinating. And if you don't know anything about the LDS Church and you read this book and you don't know anything, and these people, the people that committed these murders, they started out as LDS, but then they went off into these splinter groups to become polygamist and adhere to really the true, what they considered the true faith that the modern LDS Church had left, that they had veered off from what Joseph Smith originally taught. And whenever we lived there both times, I did research and look up what the Mormon faith was about. And on the surface and the modern Mormon Church, people will say it is just like any other Christian faith. And they do have similar beliefs and tenets, but the deeper that you go and the deeper that you study their history, they are not, their foundation, I guess you would say, is on a rocky start. It's on shifting sand, really, because their foundation is on Joseph Smith and the things that he taught, and it's a whole. But the author looks at that in this book, and because you ask yourself when you read how horrible the murder happened. Was a murder of a young woman. I think she was 22, and her child. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking, how on earth, you know? And these two men were related to this woman. It was their sister-in-law. And so how could they kill her? And then how could they kill the child? The little girl was only about 15 months old. And so you ask yourself the question of why. And the author went into that. And at the end of the book, let's see, the end of the book, the man who did the murder, I don't think he felt, even at the end, and this book was written in 2002, and the murders happened in 1984. I don't think there was ever any remorse. I think still to this day, maybe I should have looked it up to see if this man is still alive. But as far as the book, he was still sure that what he did was a commandment of God, and that was the thing. They had a revelation from God to remove these two people. Well, there was several people on the list, but they only wound up killing this woman and her child because they were the first on the list. But it was from God, according to them, according to him, and so they felt justified in doing it. And so at the very end of this book, the author is talking to a man that left this religion. He was raised in it, polygamist sect, and as an adult, which sadly is, a lot of times if they leave these cults, they sometimes go back to the LDS Church or something like that, and this gentleman didn't. He just became an atheist, and he looped throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He looped all religions under one. They were all lies, all deceitful, because he had been lied to, and he felt he had been deceived. So to him, all religions were a lie. But he was talking about, what would make a person do the things that they do, and he says I'll just read it. It's amazing how gullible people are, Deloy continues, but you have to remember what a huge comfort the religion is. It provides all the answers. It makes life simple. Nothing makes you feel better than doing what the prophet commands you to do. If you have some controversial issue that you're dealing with, let's say you owe a lot of money to somebody or you don't have the means to pay them, you go in and talk to the prophet, And he might tell you, you don't have to pay the money back. The Lord says it's okay. And if you just do what the prophet says, all the responsibility for your actions is now totally in his hands. You can refuse to pay the guy or even kill somebody or whatever and feel completely good about it. And that's a real big part of what holds this religion together. It's not having to make those critical decisions that many of us have to make and be responsible for your own decisions. And so that's what I felt, the man that it killed these women, because he put these people on a list because they had hurt him or his family member. And it was all, getting revenge or getting back at these people. But the revelation that was given was supposedly from God, saying, hey, I want you to kill these people because they're getting in the way of my work. In other words, God's work. So he didn't want to kill these people. God wanted him to kill these people. And he felt justified in carrying out what God wanted him to do. And so what that man said at the end of the book was probably a big reason why people, or these gentlemen at least, committed that murder. Anyway, it was I could go on and on about the book. It was pretty graphic as far as what happened to them, and not only the murder, there was other things that happened in history, with the Mountain Meadows Massacre. They talk about that from history in the Mormon Church. So it's a really good read. I'm really glad I read it, and I look forward to talking to Cheryl about this book. I'm really curious to see what she thought about it. So that was the first book. And sorry I went so long on that very first book. So I'm going to speed through the rest of them, do my best to speed through the rest of them. So I read the one nonfiction. I read 2 middle grade books. I talked about this one a little bit in one of my earlier videos, so I won't talk too much about it. Johnny Tremain. It is a middle grade, and it's also kind of a historical book too. I reread this in our homeschool, and this is set in the early American Revolution, right before the American Revolution. It's about a young boy named Johnny who is a apprentice silversmith, and he's very prideful. He's very prideful, but something happens to him. He has an accident and he hurts his hand in a way that he's not able to continue being a silversmith. And it really is a good story about this young man, kind of like a coming of age of, what am I going to do in life? I mean, he was so set on being a silversmith, being a successful silversmith. And he has he goes through a lot of times of doubt and depression and, what is my life going to be? And it all happens while the American Revolution is about to happen. And he's among these famous people like Paul Revere and watching what's happening. But it's a really good story with him. So I really enjoyed that one. So that was my first middle grade book. Another middle grade book that I read this month was a book. I don't have it because it was a library checkout, but it's a book called The Sky Over Rebecca. And this book, I picked it up. It wasn't on my TBR at all, but I just saw it in the library. I had to grab it. And it was a book about a young girl living in Stockholm, Sweden, and she is living with her mother, and it's just them two. And it happens during winter time, and at one point she is out and about, and she comes upon a angel in the snow, and people lie back and they move their arms and they make a snow angel. Well, she comes upon one and she sees it in the snow, and then she goes back home, and then it occurs to her that there was no footprints leading to the snow angel or away from the snow. It was just like somebody just dropped from the sky, she said, and made a snow angel. So she was faced with that little mystery. So what happens is she ends up meeting a young girl named Rebecca and her little brother, Samuel. In this area, there is a lake near her home that has frozen over and people ice skate and everything. And she realizes that in the middle of this lake, there's like a little small island, and that's where she finds Rebecca and the brother. But there's a twist to this book because Rebecca and her brother are in a different time period. They're actually in World War II, and they're Jewish children on the run from the Nazis. But somehow, the little girl, what is her name? I think her name is Kara. Kara somehow finds herself, I'm sorry, I was seeing a message from my husband. Somehow, Kara finds herself in this area. And she is able to communicate with the two children, and the story, it revolves how she helps them and everything. It's a really tender story about the two siblings and Kara, and she is able to help them in a way that I can't say because it's a spoiler, but it really was a sweet story, a middle grade story. And I liked the historical fiction and the fantasy element combined together. So that was a really good one. So those were the two middle grade books I read this month. The next genre I'll talk about is fantasy. And so this next book is called Calor, and I'll put it up here because that was also a library book. And I tell you what, I really enjoyed this book. But as I was thinking, I was like, well, what happened in this book? I read a lot of books and it's kind of hard to keep them straight. So I had to, and then I don't have it with me to look through it. I was like, oh, I can't remember. But I kind of know the main thing that happened in this book. It's a fantasy set in another world, and we have our main character. Her name is Safon, and she has a unique ability where she can extract memories from people. I believe she has to touch them, and then she can take a memory from them. So she has that power, but she lives in a world where something awful has happened to the world, like an apocalypse of some sort. So it's really dire, and she's actually a slave, and this man has her. And the reason he has her as a slave is because the world is such an apocalyptic area or site or place, you know, they don't have the things they used to have. And because she's able to extract memories, that is a commodity, and people buy memories from, you know, they buy memories, and the better the memory, the more they'll pay for it. And she is really good at what she does, and there's other people that do that, but she is really good at it. And so the person that has her as a slave is just basically using her for his own purposes, to sell these memories. Anyway, she comes across a man who finds out how good she is at what she does, and he wants to get her to do something for him, and he wants his memories erased of something that happened to him. And she doesn't want to do that because she feels if she does that, a part of him is going to be gone. But he doesn't care. He just wants this memory gone because it causes him so much pain. And so this book is I think it's a trilogy. So the first part of the book is her getting away from those who have her enslaved to help this man, and also there's an evil person that they need to deal with as well. Whole bunch of cast of characters. I do want to continue on this series, so I don't know when I'll do that. I thought about doing it soon because I was able to get another library loan for the second book. I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet. So I may just end up maybe trying to see if I can find a copy so that I can have it. So that was, I really enjoyed it. It was really good. The second fantasy book that I have talked about. Oh, it was so good. It was called Heart of Red, Blood of Blue. And that one was so good. This is one that I read to my husband this month, and he really enjoyed it too. And this is the story of a young girl her name's Gisela, and she's an albino. And she lives in a world where she's a princess, and her whole family is like red is their thing. You know, that's their, I mean, her family always wears red. Everybody wears red. The women, their hair is red. Everything's red. But she's an albino, so they cover up what she is. They cover her hair, you know, to try to keep that secret, and they paint her face and everything. It's really sad. But so when she is 6 or 7, her father is going to marry her off to a neighboring kingdom, to the prince there, to unite their kingdoms together. And they have what they call like a betrothing ceremony. And then so that would, you know, they would be betrothed, and then she would come back when she was 14 and marry this young prince. Well, something horrible happens at the beginning of the book where her and her father go to this neighboring country where she's going to marry the prince, and they are going to have this ceremony, but I don't know if I even want to say it. Something awful happens that starts a war, basically, that lasts for 10 years. And then we find her 10 years later, and the marriage never happened because of what happened at the ceremony. But 10 years later, there's a war going on, and she is being hidden in a castle because the father wants to keep her safe. And she basically has been raised alone, away from her siblings, away from her parents, and because the father wanted to keep her that way. And so she has no friends or anything. But the book is so good because there's so many twists and turns, and I loved the ending. It has a really sweet love story in it, and as I was reading it, I was thinking, is this gonna be is there gonna be another book? I don't know. I don't think it ended on it that it would be another book, but it was a really good, it's a good standalone, I guess I'd say. It's really good, and I really loved her character. My husband thought she was extremely dumb because she was making the dumbest decisions, and he was calling it, he's like, oh, this is gonna, but I do think that the big twist at the end, neither one of us, that was a really good twist at the end, and it was like, like when I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, it's so good. So highly recommend that one. 5-star read for me. Then the other fantasy book I read this month is also a 5-star read for me, and I read Mistborn, which is actually the first book is called The Final Empire, and this one is by Sanderson. And I finally read it. I started this book at, I think, the beginning of the year, and then I got sidetracked because I was getting overwhelmed with everything. And then Tiffany at Beautiful Minutia, she started this Mist-along that we're going to read the whole series in May, June, July. And I have all 3 books, and so I wanted to do that with everybody. And I loved this book. It was so good. It's not like super, yes it is. For me, anyway, it was hard for me to understand a lot of, like, what is going on? And it's so funny, in the group chat, I had posted that at the end of the book, there was this cool thing that talked about the different metals and things. And I'm like, I needed that at the beginning. Because the story involves this young girl her name is Vin, and she lives in this awful place, really. And this is kind of like the other book where they've come out of a period of time where something awful had happened to their world, and things are really, dark and dreary, and everything. And she is what is called a ska, which is like a peasant. So we have a two-tier system really, where the peasants, and then they have the lords, and the wealthy, and they're all ruled by the Lord Ruler, which is basically a god, a self-imposed god, and he is over everything, and the peasants do all the work for the nobles, and the nobles do all the work for the Lord Ruler. And but she is special because she has powers to manipulate things, and the way she's able to do that was the hard part for me at the beginning, because I didn't quite understand it, but it has to do with metals. And so like the back of the book, it talks about, and she had, her power that she had was she could manipulate people by when they, like the metal that was in her body, she could burn it somehow. And I still don't quite understand that yet, but she could burn a metal in her body, and when she did that, she was able to do a certain power. And the one that she had was soothing emotions, and so she could do that. But in the course of the book, she meets somebody that lets her know that hey, you can do all of the manipulate all or burn all the metals, and she didn't know that. And so he teaches her how to do that, and that's why she's called a Mistborn, because she can do all the metals. And there's 10 of them. So this book is a big, like what I like to call a heist. She gets involved with the crew and is gonna help them pull off this big heist. And it just, the last few chapters, or the last half of the book, were crazy, really great. The characters were really, really interesting, because you learned about what they each could do, and how different they were, and how they that crew was close to each other, and the main character, his name is Calor, I think, and how he was close to her. And she had a brother that left her, that abandoned her, and so she didn't trust people, and she always said to people that, everybody leaves me. I can't put my faith in anybody or trust anybody, because everybody's going to leave me. Her brother, her parents, her brother left her, so she had no faith in anyone. It was a great book. I'm so glad I read it, and I'm excited about to see what happens in the second book, which is called The Well of Ascension, and that's going to be the June read for Tiffany's Missed Along. Great book. That was a 5-star read for me. And then, was that my last fantasy? I think, oh no, this next book is, and I don't have it with me. I mean, I have it with me, but I let my mother-in-law borrow it. And it's Gabrielle Meyer's For a Lifetime, the third book in the Timeless series. And I recently picked up the first book. That was in my last video, my Pango haul. And so that completed my set. I had all 3 books. And so I gave those to her, and she is zipping right through. I think she probably is on, while I'm recording this video, she might already be done with all 3, because she's a fast reader. And so she has that with her. So this book was another 5-star read for me. This was the story of two twin girls that are called time crossers, and that means that when they live a life in one year, and when they go to bed and they wake up, and the next day they are in another totally different time period. And so these are, like I said, they're twin girls, and they cross together, and they live in the same period. And one of their years is back during the Salem witch trials and the 1600s, and then their other lifetime is in the 1900s, and they are there when aviation, or modern aviation, is just starting. And so you see the story of these twin girls. And so as time crossers in her Timeless series, what they do is they live their lives together, you know, both sets of lives at the same time. And then, excuse me, had to get a drink of water. They live, like I was saying, they live at the same time, these lives. But when they are 21, I believe, they get to choose which path they want to take. And so at the very beginning of the book, the girls are talking, and they for sure are both, when they turn 21, they're going to pick the 1900s. They don't want to stay in Salem witch trials because they know what's coming, because they know from history, they've learned what happens in Salem during that time period, and they don't want to be around when that happens. And so that's the story. That's the story Gabrielle gives us, and it was such a good book. I really enjoyed it. And these Timeless books, they just, I like each one for different reasons, and this one was no exception. It was really good. I love the sisters' relationships because they were both experiencing the time crossing together, and also they were twins, but they were so different. They had such different personalities, and that I really love that too. Okay, so those were my fantasy reads, and then I had two books that weren't fantasy, weren't any of the other categories. I had the book called The Maid, and this would be like maybe like a mystery, a cozy mystery book. And this was about a young girl named Molly, and she was a maid, so they called her Molly the Maid. Her character was so touching because she was a young girl, and I think you would probably think she was on the spectrum, maybe autistic. And she was raised by her grandmother because her mother had left her, or her parents actually, both of them left her, and the grandmother raised her. And the grandmother was an older woman that the things that how she spoke and what she believed, and you know, she raised this little girl from a baby, and so Molly picked up all of the mannerisms of an older person, and she spoke like her grandmother, and you think, well, did she act this way because she was autistic, or did she act this way because that's just how the grandmother raised her? So, you know, is it, you know, is it, you know, both things. And the reason I say that is because she spoke really, you know, she said what was on her, you know, she said what was on her mind, even though it was like awkward, and people that didn't know her, she talks about when she was in school, she was bullied and things. But at the beginning of this book, she is a maid, and she's working in this nice hotel. And what I love about Molly is that she loves to clean. And it's like, oh wow, I wish I had that, that gift or that liking to clean. But she loved to clean, and she loved her job. You know, she was a maid. People would say, you know, she's just a maid, you know, you're just a maid. But no, she took so much pride in her job, and some of her favorite things were like making, you know, getting her cart, you know, together before she started her shift, and her wearing her crisp, nice laundered uniform. You know, she had such pride in her work. One of the funny things is when she talks about going on her first date with this guy that she liked, and she talked about it in the past, saying that was a year ago, our first date was a year ago, and I thought, oh, this guy really dated her? And then later on you realize what that first date really was, and you're like, oh, that really wasn't a date. She thought it was a date, but that really wasn't a date. But the main part of the book is that in the very beginning, she is working and doing her job, and she comes across a dead body. And so this is the mystery of who killed this person. And so that part was fine as far as the mystery and everything. But of course, what makes this book so good is Molly, and how she is with other people, how people treat her relationship with her grandmother, which was so sweet and special, and what happened there is really heartbreaking. So I really like that. This is a first book in a series too. I might there was some parts in it that I didn't like the end, kind of how they did to Molly, how she ended, not necessarily, but I'm curious. I'm curious to try to read, maybe I will try to read the next book. Okay, and the last book I'm going to talk about is this book right here. Yes, I can check it off my list. I finally read Pride and Prejudice, and this was the book that I picked out of my little jar for books that I've been wanting to read and I haven't. And I kept saying in my videos, because this had been on a previous TBR, but I kept saying in my videos that I didn't know, I've never, you know, obviously I never read Pride and Prejudice, and I never watched the movies, and so I didn't know the story. Well, lo and behold, as I'm reading the book, I'm like, this sounds familiar. And I read a little bit more, and I'm like, this sounds really, really familiar. I'm like, I think I watched the movie. The more I read, I'm like, yeah, I watched this movie. So, but I have watched the movie, but I guess I watched it so long ago that as I'm reading, I don't know what's going to happen next until I'm there, and then I remember it. So I knew the basic story about the couple, but I didn't know the particulars about it. But as I'm reading it, I think it was the Keira Knightley version that I saw, because that's what I was picturing in my head. And so I really struggled with it at first. This was my first, I haven't read a lot of classics from this and from this time period and a Jane Austen book. So I had some trouble with the book. The language is just so different. It's not, obviously it's not modern the way we speak today. And a lot of the cultural things and the traditions and everything, which I found fascinating, the whole thing about, this rich guy moves into town or is visiting or something, he's there, and they have to, they want to go meet him, but how do you do that? You got to be introduced, there's all these etiquette rules and things like that. But this story revolves around Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy and their relationship and how they meet, and how she doesn't like him in the very beginning. I mean, nobody liked this poor guy. And I could tell just from by reading, I'm like, well, he's, he is kind of stuffy and kind of, he's the pride and she's the prejudice in the book. But very, snotty, snooty or whatever. But I don't know, I just sense that, he's just reserved. He's not, outspoken, and, he's just keeps everything close to, and I didn't think he was all that bad as everybody, right away. Nobody liked this poor guy, and then her family is something else. And she's something else. She's a little different for that time period. Very outspoken, and I love the conversations that she had with his, was it his aunt? Oh yeah, his aunt was something else too. And she, later on in the book, she doesn't like her nephew to be with Elizabeth because of, she wasn't good enough, I guess, for her nephew. But their conversation between, where Elizabeth really stuck up for herself, she really did, and I really liked that part. She was pretty strong. And so I was glad I read it. I finally, like I said, checked it off my list. And so I was excited to see that in July, there is a Jane Austen July, and I'm going to read one of her books. I actually I have two other books of hers in my on my shelves. I have Persuasion, and I also have the Mansfield Park. I'm probably going to read Persuasion because that's a shorter book, and I've heard that's really good too. And then also I have, for you Pride and Prejudice lovers out there, let me know. I want to read a Pride and Prejudice retelling, like a contemporary version of the story. I really would, but I want to read a good one, So if you know of any Pride and Prejudice retellings, contemporary retellings, please let me know in the comments below, because I really want to read that for this next month, because I think that's one of the, in the Jane Austen July, I think that's one of the prompts to read a retelling, if I'm mistaken. But anyway, so that was that's it. Those are all the books I read this month, and I'm gonna double check my notes to make sure. Okay, we did Under the Banner, John Tremain, Calor, For a Lifetime, The Maid, and yeah, that's all of them. And a lot of good, a wide variety of books that I read in May, and was really glad that I pushed through. I didn't have any DNFs. I finished every book that I started. I did not get to all the books that I wanted to read for like the Southern Charm Readathon. I had a bunch of other books that I didn't get to, but the ones I was pleased with, the ones that I did end up reading this month. So that is it. That are all the books that I read in May. Please let me know in the comments below if you have read any of these books. What are your thoughts? I know a lot of people have read like Pride and Prejudice in the past. Anybody read Mistborn this month, or if they read it before? Please let me know if you've read that, because I would love to talk to you about that book. It's so interesting, that whole universe that Brandon Sanderson has created. I think I'm really going to enjoy this trilogy, because it really makes you think about what's happening, and then all the political. I didn't get into a lot of it, but it's a lot of the political things that are happening, and then the people. There were so many characters. I had said I was going to write make myself a little bookmark with all the names of the characters and what they can do, you know, because a lot of the people in the crew had different powers and things, and so I wanted to write everybody's name down, because I need to keep everybody straight. Anyway, so that is it again for my May reading wrap up. I had a really great reading month. Let me know below, what was your favorite book this month, or what was your favorite read that you had in May? Let me know what your favorite book was, and I would love to hear that. And so thank you for hanging out with me today. You all have a blessed day. Bye.